Hello, my name is Barbara Lowe Fisher. My son was injured by DPT vaccine in 1980, and this is a commentary brought to you by the nonprofit National Vaccine Information Center. Doctors at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia are ordering all employees to get a flu shot every year or be sent home for 2 weeks without pay to think about it. Anyone who still refuses to get a flu shot after that is fired. 60% of all U.S. healthcare professionals don't want to get an annual flu shot, which matches the number of Americans who choose not to get a flu shot even in pandemic years. Surveys reveal that healthcare providers know that influenza vaccine can cause nasty, unexpected side effects for some people, like paralysis and convulsions. But that has not stopped medical organizations from launching a national crusade to force everyone employed in a healthcare setting to get a flu shot every year, whether they have direct contact with patients or not. That's right, not just doctors and nurses, but every single person who has anything to do with the healthcare facility, including students, volunteers, and contract workers. An exception is made if the doctors in charge choose to approve a medical exemption to vaccination, which today is about as hard to get as a job. It's not a pretty sight to watch doctors acting more like thugs than healers. When doctors threaten people with financial ruin for refusing to shut up and salute smartly, there's something wrong. Trust is replaced with fear and anger. People start asking questions. Questions like, who will be threatened and punished next for refusing a flu shot? The answer is you, me, and every American. We are next in line because when doctors trade in their white coats for military uniforms, going after their own is just the first step on the road to going after the rest of us. If this latest power grab is allowed to set precedent in America, the only question in the future will be, how many vaccines will we be forced to take or lose our jobs, our health insurance, our right to enter a hospital or receive medical care or get on a plane or check into a hotel if we can't prove we've gotten vaccinated? Vaccine mandates are nothing new in America. After smallpox outbreaks disfigured or killed up to 1/3 of those infected during the 17th and 18th centuries, in 1905 the U.S. Supreme Court gave permission to states to pass laws requiring smallpox vaccination. Since then, that precedent-setting Supreme Court case, Jacobson versus Massachusetts, has become a kind of holy scripture for public health officials who have used it to persuade state legislators to pass a whole slew of new vaccine laws, barring children from going to school unless they prove they have been injected with dozens of doses of vaccines for infectious diseases that do not come close to being as deadly or contagious as smallpox. So even though the 1905 Supreme Court legal opinion was about Americans getting 1 or 2 smallpox vaccinations, since then it has been used by doctors to wage an evangelistic crusade to smack down all microorganisms associated with infectious disease by calling on 300 million Americans to be injected with multiple vaccines from day of birth to year of death. This, of course, has also created a lucrative boondoggle for pharmaceutical corporations seeking a guaranteed liability-free market for every new vaccine licensed and sold in America, the 3rd largest nation in the world, which helps these companies finance and develop huge global markets as well. In 2009 alone, multinational corporations took home profits of $2.8 billion in influenza vaccine sales. What most people don't realize is that those long-dead U.S. Supreme Court judges used a pseudo-ethic, utilitarianism, to justify their legal opinion that vaccination should be forced in America. Utilitarianism, which argues that an action is moral if it results in the greatest good for the greatest number of people, was quite popular at the turn of the 20th century. The cruel reality of what can happen to individuals when utilitarianism is used to prop up public health policy was brought home in 1927, when U.S. Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes used the Jacobson versus Massachusetts decision to facilitate the forced sterilization of a young woman. At the age of 7 months, Carrie Buck was judged to be mentally retarded, just like her mother. So Holmes gave the green light to the state of Virginia to employ a eugenics solution advocated by medical doctors and scientists and sterilize Carrie for the greater good of society. Justice Holmes said flatly and prophetically, quote, "The principle that sustains compulsory vaccination is broad enough to cover cutting the fallopian tubes." It is no surprise that Hitler and the Nazis were big fans of Oliver Wendell Holmes. By the way, it turned out that Carrie was not mentally retarded after all. Utilitarianism, like eugenics, was discredited during the doctors' trial at Nuremberg after World War II, when medical doctors and scientists who were charged with crimes against humanity used the utilitarian rationale to justify medical experiments on captive human subjects. The doctors' trial in 1946 gave birth to the Nuremberg Code and the ethical principle of informed consent, which has been the guiding principle in the ethical practice of modern medicine since then. Respect for the informed consent principle protects ordinary people from exploitation by wealthy and powerful individuals, corporations, and institutions in society who are in charge of defining the greater good and can easily invoke that utilitarian argument to commit civil and human rights abuses. Now we come full circle to 2010, as we witness doctors in positions of authority threatening people with loss of employment and financial ruin if they refuse to get injected every year with influenza vaccine, a vaccine that carries two risks: the risk of injury or death and the risk of not working at all. Why are we allowing fellow citizens with MD or PhD written after their names tell us what kinds of risks to take with our lives and the lives of our children? Why do we continue to put doctors and scientists with big titles on a pedestal in America and fail to put boundaries on the power they too often wield with callous disregard for the informed consent ethic, civil liberties, and individual human life? Whether or not you are a healthcare provider, the decision about whether or not to get a flu shot every year is a personal health choice that should be yours to make after you become informed and weigh the benefits and risks. Educated healthcare professionals and consumers alike are quite capable of analyzing the facts about influenza and influenza vaccine, including the fact that 1, 80% of all flu-like illness reported during the flu season is not caused by influenza, but by other viruses and bacteria. 2, only 5 to 20% of Americans get type A or type B influenza in an average year, and the majority recover without any complications and are left with immunity to the strains they were infected with, which contributes to natural herd immunity in our population. 3, like most infectious diseases, influenza can be prevented or reduced in home and healthcare settings with hand washing, masking, and separating sick and healthy persons. 4, influenza viruses are constantly evolving, so depending upon the year, the flu shot may or may not contain the influenza strains associated with most reported influenza cases. 5, the majority of published influenza studies are so poorly designed, they have not demonstrated that influenza vaccine is effective or safe. 6, influenza vaccines containing the pandemic H1N1 swine flu strain have generated increased reports of paralysis, blood disorders, and convulsions. 7, there are no clinical studies to evaluate the long-term positive or negative health effects on a human populations of being injected with influenza vaccine every year throughout life. 8, nobody knows whether mass use of influenza vaccine from the cradle to the grave by all Americans will put pressure on influenza strains to become more virulent, like has happened with other microorganisms and universally used vaccines. It is unscientific, irresponsible, and a gross waste of healthcare dollars, especially in these hard economic times, for doctors and scientists in positions of authority to conduct an uncontrolled and forced medical experiment on the American people by threatening societal sanctions for those who refuse to get a flu shot every year. Firing healthcare workers already hit by unemployment for simply exercising their human right to informed consent to medical risk-taking is unnecessary and unethical. The National Vaccine Information Center, which has defended the informed consent ethic in medicine since 1982, joins with other responsible organizations and enlightened individuals who oppose use of intimidation and retaliation to force all healthcare professionals to use influenza vaccine. NVIC continues to call for informed consent protections in all vaccine policies and laws in America, including liberal, medical, religious, and conscientious belief exemptions to vaccination. A British historian who died 3 years before the 1905 U.S. Supreme Court justices issued their flawed legal opinion about mandatory vaccination got it right when he said, quote, "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." History has shown that medical doctors and scientists do not know how to wield power without leaving a trail of human suffering behind them. It is time for Americans to stand up and draw a line in the sand for doctors who fail to appreciate the difference between offering a medical opinion and giving an order that punishes people for disagreeing with that opinion. To learn more about diseases and vaccines, go to www.nvic.org. Sign up for our vaccine e-newsletter and watch for the launching of NVIC's Vaccine Advocacy Portal, an online service that will give you the tools you need to stand up in your state and protect your human right to informed consent to vaccination. Remember, it's your health, your family, and your choice. Thank you.